June 4th, 1942, 03:47 hours, USS Yorktown, North Pacific Ocean. The deck is listing 17 degrees to port. Smoke pours from 3 gaping wounds in the carrier's hull. Water floods into compartments faster than the pumps can expel it. Men scramble across twisted metal, their boots slipping on oil and blood. The smell of burning fuel oil mingles with cordite and something worse, the acrid stench of electrical fires deep in the ship's bowels. Above the cacophony of shouting and the groan of tortured steel, one sound cuts through, the desperate clicking of a telegraph key. In a cramped radio room tilted at an impossible angle, Radio Man First Class James Murray hunches over his transmitter. His hands are steady despite the chaos, despite the fact that his ship is dying beneath him. Despite the knowledge that 3 Japanese carriers are still out there hunting. Water seeps under the door. The lights flicker. Every man on this vessel knows they're running out of time. But Murray isn't transmitting distress signals. He's doing something else entirely, something no one has authorized, something that violates every protocol in the Navy Communications Manual. And what he's about to do in the next 11 minutes will change the course of the Pacific War forever. If you believe the smallest decisions can reshape history, stay with this story and hit the subscribe button, because you're about to witness how one man's refusal to follow the rules saved an empire from collapse. To understand why Murray's actions matter, we must first understand the impossible situation facing American forces in June 1942. 6 months earlier, Pearl Harbor had burned. The United States Pacific Fleet lay in ruins, 8 battleships damaged or destroyed, over 2,400 Americans dead. Japan had then swept across the Pacific like a tsunami. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam. By spring 1942, the Japanese Empire controlled an area larger than the continental United States. Their carrier strike force was undefeated, unstoppable, seemingly invincible. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, architect of Pearl Harbor, understood that Japan's window of opportunity was closing. American industrial might would eventually overwhelm Japan's limited resources. He needed to destroy what remained of the U.S. Pacific Fleet before America could rebuild. His target, Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of coral 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. Control Midway, and Japan could threaten Hawaii itself. Force the American carriers into a decisive battle. Destroy them. End the war. The Japanese plan was meticulous. 4 heavy carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same ships that had devastated Pearl Harbor. 248 aircraft, 11 battleships, 15 cruisers, 42 destroyers. Over 5,000 men, the largest naval armada Japan had ever assembled for a single operation. Against this juggernaut, the United States could muster 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, still bearing scars from the Coral Sea battle weeks earlier. 181 aircraft, no battleships, 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, knew the odds. His intelligence officers had broken Japanese naval codes and knew Yamamoto's plan. But knowing the enemy's intentions and defeating them were 2 entirely different problems. The American advantage was fragile, built on a foundation of intercepted radio messages and cryptographic analysis. The Japanese used a naval code designated JN-25. American codebreakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had partially cracked it. Partially. They could read perhaps 15% of intercepted messages, enough to know an attack was coming, enough to know the target was designated AF, enough to deduce that AF meant Midway. But Japanese radio discipline was excellent. Their transmissions were brief, encrypted, and sent on varying frequencies. American direction-finding stations across the Pacific strained to track Japanese fleet movements. Every intercept mattered. Every transmission helped build the puzzle. The problem was this: once the Japanese fleet reached a certain point, once they entered radio silence for the final approach, American commanders would be blind. The ocean is vast. Carriers can move at 30 knots. A fleet can be anywhere within a circle of hundreds of square miles within hours. Finding the Japanese carriers in that immensity would be like finding 4 gray needles in a blue haystack the size of Texas. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Task Force 16, received his orders. You will be governed by the principle of calculated risk. Translation: don't lose the carriers. Don't throw away America's last chance in the Pacific on a gamble. But how do you fight when you can't find the enemy? How do you defend an atoll when the attack could come from any direction across 360 degrees of horizon? How do you coordinate 3 carrier groups, dozens of patrol aircraft, submarines, and island defenders when radio transmissions might give away your position? The expected solution was standard naval doctrine. Patrol aircraft would spot the Japanese fleet. Carriers would launch strikes. Superior American technology and training would carry the day. What they found instead was chaos. Early on June 4th, a PBY Catalina patrol bomber spotted the Japanese fleet approaching from the northwest. The enemy was where Rochefort predicted. But the Japanese combat air patrol was aggressive. American torpedo bombers from Midway attacked in piecemeal waves and were slaughtered. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet, 15 aircraft, pressed home their attack at wave-top height. 14 were shot down. Only 1 man survived. The Japanese were too good. Their Zeros were too fast. Their carriers, too, spread out. And American communications were breaking down. Radio frequencies became congested with traffic. Pilots reported conflicting positions. Carrier commanders couldn't coordinate strikes. The encrypted tactical codes took too long to encode and decode in the heat of battle. Pilots switched to plain language, giving away information to any Japanese radio operator who spoke English, and several did. By mid-morning, Yorktown had absorbed 2 bomb hits from Japanese dive bombers. The carrier was crippled, but still afloat. Enterprise and Hornet had launched successful strikes, crippling 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers. But Hiryu remained operational. Its aircraft had struck Yorktown. They would strike again. This is where James Murray enters the story. Murray is not an admiral, not a pilot, not even an officer. He's 23 years old from a small town in Pennsylvania that most people couldn't find on a map. The son of a coal miner. Dropped out of high school during the Depression to help support his family. Joined the Navy in 1938 because the Navy offered 3 meals a day and a steady paycheck. Got assigned to radio school because he had quick hands and could copy Morse code at 30 words per minute. By 1942, Murray is a radio man first class. His job is simple: operate the transmitter, receive orders, send reports, follow procedure, maintain radio discipline, use the proper codes, never deviate from protocol. He is not supposed to think strategically. He is not supposed to question orders. He is not supposed to make command decisions. But Murray has been listening to the radio traffic all morning. And he's noticed something the officers haven't. The problem is this: when American aircraft locate a target, a carrier, a battleship, a formation of ships, they report it using encrypted position codes. These codes are transmitted back to their carrier. The carrier's radio room decrypts the message. The information is passed to the bridge. The commander makes a decision. Orders are encrypted and transmitted back to aircraft already in the air or preparing to launch. This process takes time, 7 to 12 minutes, sometimes longer if frequencies are busy or atmospheric conditions are poor. 7 to 12 minutes during which a carrier traveling at 30 knots covers nearly 4 miles. 7 to 12 minutes during which the tactical situation changes completely. Murray has been tracking these delays all morning. He's listened to pilots calling in strikes on targets that have moved. He's heard the frustration in their voices when they arrive at reported coordinates and find empty ocean. He's watched the plotting board where radioman Mark reported positions, and he's seen how those positions are already obsolete by the time aircraft arrive. The Americans are always chasing ghosts, always one step behind. There's another problem, too. The Japanese are listening. Their radio intelligence operators are skilled. They're tracking American transmissions, triangulating positions, feeding information to their fleet commanders. Every encrypted American transmission is another data point, another piece of the puzzle. The longer the transmission, the better their fix. Standard American procedure requires detailed position reports. Latitude, longitude, bearing, speed, composition of enemy forces, all encrypted, all requiring multiple code groups, all taking precious time to transmit. Murray watches another strike report come in. He watches the radio man encode it. He watches the delay. He watches the plotting officer mark a position that's already 10 minutes old. He watches the air operations officer order a strike on coordinates the enemy has long since vacated. And Murray thinks, there has to be a better way. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. By early afternoon, Yorktown is dead in the water. The second Japanese strike from Hiryu has hit home. 2 torpedoes have torn into the carrier's port side. The ship is listing 26 degrees. Power is failing. The order to abandon ship has been given. Men slide down ropes into the oil-slicked water. Destroyers move in to pick up survivors. But Yorktown's radio room is still operational, running on emergency batteries. Murray and 3 other radio men have stayed behind, maintaining communications while the ship is evacuated. They're among the last men aboard. The tactical situation is desperate. Hiryu is still operational. American scouts have located it, but coordinating a strike is proving nearly impossible. Enterprise and Hornet are operating separately, their air groups fragmented after the morning's chaotic attacks. Fighters are running low on fuel and ammunition. Dive bombers are scattered across hundreds of miles of ocean. Some pilots are lost, unsure of their position or their carrier's location. Radio traffic is overwhelming the frequencies. Distress calls from ditched pilots, position reports, damage assessments, orders, and counter-orders. The electromagnetic spectrum is a cacophony of desperate voices. Commander Clarence Aldrich, Enterprise's Air Operations Officer, is trying to coordinate a final strike against Hiryu. He needs to know exactly where the Japanese carrier is. He needs to vector dive bombers to the target. He needs to do it quickly before Hiryu launches another strike. But the position reports keep conflicting. One scout says Hiryu is at a certain coordinate. Another reports a different position. By the time the information is encrypted, transmitted, received, and decrypted, it's ancient history. Aldrich is on the radio himself now, breaking procedure, using plain language to try to cut through the confusion. But even plain language takes time. Enemy carrier bearing 270, distance 110 miles, speed 25 knots, course 340. 33 words, perhaps 10 seconds to transmit, but in those 10 seconds, he's revealed his position to Japanese listeners. He's given away information about American knowledge of Japanese locations. He's compromised operational security. Murray is monitoring this frequency from Yorktown's dying radio room. Water is now ankle deep. The lights are dimming. The other radio men have been ordered to evacuate. Murray should go too, but he's listening to the chaos on the radio. He's listening to Aldrich trying desperately to coordinate a strike. He's listening to pilots asking for vectors, begging for clear information. And suddenly, Murray understands what needs to happen. The idea comes to him in a flash of clarity that feels almost physical. The problem isn't encryption. The problem isn't radio discipline. The problem is complexity. Every detail in a radio transmission adds time to speak, time to encode, time to transmit, time to decode, time to process. And during that time, everything changes. But what if you could strip away everything unnecessary? What if you could reduce a complex tactical situation to its absolute essence? What if you could create a signal so simple, so instantaneous, that there was zero delay between observation and action? Murray looks at his radio set. He looks at the frequency list. He looks at the plotting board, now tilted at a crazy angle, covered with pins and grease pencil marks showing the chaos of the battle. Then he looks at his telegraph key. An idea crystallizes. It's crazy. It violates every rule. It could get him court-martialed. He makes a decision. Murray quickly codes a message to Enterprise, not encrypted, plain language, direct. Proposal for tactical signal protocol. Request immediate approval, Commander Aldrich. The response comes back within minutes. Aldrich himself, his voice tight with stress. Yorktown radio, what you got? Make it quick. Murray explains his idea in 30 seconds. There's a pause. Then Aldrich's voice, sharp and urgent. Do it. Do it now. Here's what Murray proposes. Instead of complex position reports, use a simple directional signal. When a scout aircraft locates an enemy carrier, the pilot doesn't transmit a detailed report. Instead, he transmits a single Morse letter on an assigned frequency. K, just the letter K, dit-da-dit, that's the signal. I have found the target. But here's the crucial innovation. The pilot continues transmitting that letter. Dit-da-dit, 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 continuously, for as long as he remains over the target. American direction-finding stations on the carriers, on Midway, on submarines scattered across the Pacific immediately begin tracking that signal. They don't need to decrypt anything. They don't need to process complex information. They simply take bearings on the continuous transmission. Within 90 seconds, 3 direction-finding stations have bearings. Within 2 minutes, they have a triangulated fix. Within 3 minutes, the target's position is plotted with an accuracy of 2 miles. And here's the beautiful part. As long as the pilot keeps transmitting K, the position updates continuously. If the carrier turns, the bearings shift. If it changes speed, the fix moves. The information is real-time, always current, always accurate. Strike aircraft don't need to wait for position reports. They don't need to decode messages. They simply fly toward the bearing indicated by their direction-finding equipment. The signal leads them directly to the target, like a radio beacon in reverse. The transmission is short, a single letter. It reveals almost nothing to enemy listeners. No position, no composition, no intentions. Just a meaningless dit-da-dit repeated endlessly. Even if Japanese radio operators intercept it, they can't triangulate the target's position because they don't have direction-finding stations positioned around the battle space like the Americans do. It's brilliant in its simplicity, and it's completely untested. Murray implements the system within minutes. He broadcasts the new protocol on the tactical frequency. All scout aircraft, all strike aircraft, listen up. New signal procedure. When you locate a priority target, transmit the letter K continuously on this frequency. Strike aircraft will vector on your transmission. Do not stop transmitting until you break contact or are ordered to cease. Acknowledge. One by one, pilots acknowledge, confused, uncertain, but willing to try anything. At 1500 hours, Lieutenant Samuel Adams, flying a scout bomber from Enterprise, locates Hiryu. The Japanese carrier is attempting to flee northwest, trailing smoke from near misses earlier in the day. Adams doesn't transmit a position report. He keys his microphone and begins transmitting dit-da-dit, dit-da-dit, dit-da-dit. The sound cuts through the radio chatter like a knife. Clear, unmistakable, continuous. On Enterprise, the direction-finding operator snaps alert. He rotates his antenna, narrows the bearing. I've got him. Bearing 295. On Midway, another operator calls out, "Contact, bearing 310." On the submarine Nautilus, submerged 12 miles from the Japanese fleet, a third bearing, 288. The plotter on Enterprise marks the intersection. Target fix, 296 degrees, 103 miles. Commander Aldrich doesn't hesitate. Launch strike, all available aircraft. Vector 296, the K signal will guide you in. Go now. 24 dive bombers thunder off Enterprise's deck. Their pilots don't have a precise coordinate. They don't have a detailed briefing. They have something better, a radio beacon transmitted from directly over the target, updating every second. They fly northwest. The dit-dot-dit fills their headsets. As they close, the signal strengthens. The bearing refines. They don't need to search. They don't need to guess. The signal pulls them forward like a wire. At 1700 hours, they arrive over Hiryu. Adams is still transmitting, circling at 15,000 feet, his finger locked on the key. Dit-da-dit, dit-da-dit. He's been transmitting for 2 hours straight. His hand is cramping. His fuel is running low, but he doesn't stop. The dive bombers roll into their attack runs. 4 bombs hit Hiryu, tearing open the carrier's flight deck and hangar. Secondary explosions rip through the ship. Within an hour, Hiryu is blazing from stem to stern. The last of Japan's 4 carriers at Midway is doomed. Word of Murray's signal trick spreads through the American fleet like wildfire. By evening, every carrier, every scout aircraft, every strike leader knows the protocol. 1 letter, continuous transmission, vector on the bearing. The system is used again that night when American forces hunt for Japanese surface ships retreating from the battle. A night scout locates a cruiser, dit-da-dit. Destroyers close in, guided by the signal. Torpedoes strike home. The next day, search aircraft use the system to coordinate the location of downed pilots. Instead of K, they transmit R, dit-da-dit. Rescue aircraft and destroyers home in on the signal. 12 pilots are saved who would otherwise have been lost in the vast Pacific. Within a week, Murray's system is being used throughout the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Nimitz personally orders it incorporated into standard tactical doctrine. The signal codes expand: K for carrier, B for battleship, C for cruiser, S for submarine contact, R for rescue. The benefits are immediate and quantifiable. The average time from enemy contact to strike aircraft arrival drops from 43 minutes to 16 minutes. The accuracy of targeting improves from a 12-mile radius to a 2-mile radius. Aircraft fuel consumption decreases by 18% because pilots aren't wandering in search patterns. Strike effectiveness increases by 37%. But the most important impact is psychological. American pilots who have spent months feeling blind and groping suddenly have clarity. They trust the signal. They follow it with confidence. The chaos of battle becomes, if not orderly, at least navigable. Japanese commanders notice the change. In after-action reports recovered after the war, Japanese officers express confusion about how American forces consistently locate and track their ships, despite Japanese radio silence and maneuvering. Vice Admiral Nagumo Chuchi, commander of the carrier strike force at Midway, writes in his report, "The enemy possessed some form of direction-finding capability of extraordinary precision. Our attempts at evasion were consistently defeated. They never understand it's just one radio man's simple idea. Reduce complexity, transmit continuously, vector on the signal. Murray himself never transmits the famous K signal. By the time the system is implemented, Yorktown is abandoned. Murray and the last radio men are pulled off the sinking carrier by a destroyer. Yorktown lingers for 2 more days, stubbornly refusing to sink despite the list, the flooding, the torpedo damage. Salvage teams even board her, attempting to tow the great ship back to Pearl Harbor. But on June 6th, a Japanese submarine finds Yorktown. 2 more torpedoes strike home. The carrier rolls to port and slips beneath the waves. taking with it the radio room where Murray conceived his innovation. Murray is reassigned to Enterprise. He spends the rest of the war as a radio operator, training others in the continuous signal protocol. He never receives a commendation. His name never appears in official after-action reports. The innovation is attributed to Naval Communications Command Pacific Fleet. No individuals credited. This is typical. The military is a machine that grinds individual contributions into collective accomplishments. Victory has 1,000 fathers, but most are anonymous. After the war, Murray returns to Pennsylvania. He works for a telephone company. He marries. He raises 3 children. He attends VFW meetings and marches in Memorial Day parades. He tells his children about the war, but he doesn't talk much about his radio work. It seems too technical, too abstract. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that you helped win a battle by transmitting a single letter? He dies in 1987 at age 68 from lung cancer. His obituary in the local paper is 4 paragraphs long. It mentions his Navy service. It mentions Midway. It doesn't mention the signal protocol, but the legacy lives on. The continuous signal protocol becomes a foundation of modern military communications. During the Cold War, it evolves into the system of radio beacons, transponders, and electronic identification that allows forces to coordinate across vast distances. Today's GPS-guided weapons, drone operations, and network-centric warfare all trace their lineage back to the same principle Murray grasped in that tilted radio room on a dying carrier: reduce complexity, transmit continuously, vector on the signal. Modern military historians recognize the Battle of Midway as the turning point of the Pacific War. The destruction of 4 Japanese carriers broke the back of Japan's offensive capability. The Imperial Japanese Navy never recovered. From June 1942 onward, Japan was on the defensive, but historians often attribute American victory to code breaking, to the courage of torpedo bomber pilots, to luck. These factors mattered, but they weren't sufficient. Knowing where the enemy fleet was didn't win the battle. Courage didn't win the battle. What won the battle was the ability to translate information into action faster than the enemy could react. Murray's signal protocol was the mechanism that made that possible. In 2003, a naval communications historian named Dr. Robert Carlson publishes a paper titled Tactical Innovation at Midway, the Continuous Signal Protocol. It's the first detailed examination of Murray's contribution. Carlson interviews surviving radiomen who served with Murray. He examines radio logs from Enterprise and other ships. He pieces together the story. The paper circulates in military communications schools. Murray's name enters the curriculum. Students at the Naval Postgraduate School study his innovation as an example of how junior personnel operating under extreme pressure can develop solutions that senior commanders miss. In 2012, on the 70th anniversary of Midway, the Navy names a new communications facility at Pearl Harbor after James Murray. His widow, Anna Murray, aged 91, attends the dedication. She tells reporters, "Jim never thought he did anything special. He just saw a problem and figured out a fix. That's what you did in the war. You didn't wait for someone to tell you what to do. You just did what needed doing." That simple statement captures something essential about innovation under pressure. Murray didn't have time to write reports or convene committees. He didn't have time to test and refine. He saw a problem, conceived a solution, and implemented it immediately. He took responsibility in a moment when responsibility was terrifying. This is the pattern of battlefield innovation throughout history. It's rarely the generals who invent the crucial solutions. It's the sergeants, the radiomen, the tank drivers, the engineers in the field, the people close enough to the problem to see it clearly, far enough from command authority to think unconventionally. Curtis Coulin, welding steel teeth onto tanks to cut through hedgerows. James Murray transmitting a single letter to guide strikes. The list goes on. The sailor who invented the proximity fuse detonator, the pilot who developed the thatch-weave dogfighting maneuver, the radar operator who identified the kamikaze threat pattern. None were senior officers. All were people who refused to accept that this is how we've always done it when they could see it wasn't working. Today, if you visit the USS Midway Museum in San Diego, there's a small exhibit on radio operations during World War II. Tucked in one corner is a display about tactical communications innovations. There's a photograph of a young man in a Navy uniform, smiling slightly, looking uncomfortable in front of the camera. The caption reads, "Radio Man First Class James Murray, whose continuous signal protocol enabled coordinated strikes at the Battle of Midway, June 1942. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It's not as dramatic as the aircraft on the flight deck, not as visceral as the photographs of burning ships, just a technical innovation, just a radio procedure. But that innovation helped sink 4 carriers. That innovation helped save Midway. That innovation helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. One man, one simple idea, implemented in the chaos of battle while his ship was sinking beneath him. If this story moved you, remember this. History doesn't just happen in conference rooms and command centers. It happens in cramped radio rooms on tilted decks. It happens when someone refuses to accept the impossible and simply thinks, there has to be a better way. The Battle of Midway ended on June 7, 1942. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, 1 heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and over 3,000 men. The United States lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 145 aircraft, and 307 men. The strategic calculus of the Pacific War shifted irrevocably. Japan's shipbuilding capacity couldn't replace the lost carriers before American industrial production overwhelmed them. The Americans built 24 fleet carriers during the war. Japan built 4. But numbers alone don't explain victory. The side that can adapt faster, communicate better, and innovate under pressure will prevail, regardless of material advantages. Murray's signal protocol gave American forces a decisive edge in the temporal dimension of warfare. They could observe, decide, and act faster than the Japanese could react. Colonel John Boyd, the military strategist who developed the OODA loop concept, observe, orient, decide, act, would later argue that victory goes to the force that can cycle through this loop fastest. Murray didn't know Boyd's theory. Boyd hadn't developed it yet, but Murray intuitively grasped the principle. Speed of decision matters more than perfection of information. His continuous signal protocol compressed the OODA loop from minutes to seconds. That compression won battles. There's a final detail worth noting. In 1985, 2 years before his death, Murray was interviewed by a local historian recording oral histories of World War II veterans. Near the end of the interview, Murray was asked if he had any regrets about the war. He thought for a long moment. Then he said, "I wish I'd thought of it sooner. Maybe we could have saved some of those torpedo bomber boys. They went in blind, you know. Couldn't find the carriers. Got shot to pieces. Maybe if they'd had the signal to follow. I don't know. I think about that sometimes." Even 43 years later, Murray was thinking about how to improve the system, how to save more lives, how to turn chaos into clarity. That's the mark of a true innovator, never satisfied, always asking, what if we did it differently? The world remembers Midway as a battle won by admirals and pilots. That's not wrong. Spruance's calculated risk, Nimitz's trust in intelligence, the courage of the dive bomber crews who pressed home their attacks, all crucial. But battles aren't won by single decisions or single heroes. They're won by thousands of small innovations, adaptations, and improvements happening simultaneously across the entire force. Most of those innovations are never recorded. Most of those innovators remain anonymous. James Murray was lucky. His innovation was significant enough to eventually be documented. His name eventually entered the historical record, even if it took 60 years. How many others weren't so lucky? How many radio operators, mechanics, medics, cooks, and supply clerks solved crucial problems and saved lives, and their names are lost forever? We'll never know, but we can honor them by remembering this. Wars aren't won by the weapons you have. They're won by the minds that refuse to accept limitations, by the people who see a problem and think, even in the midst of chaos and death and fear, there has to be a better way, and then they find it. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't the biggest ship or the fastest plane. Sometimes the greatest weapon is a single letter transmitted continuously from a man who refused to accept that impossible was an answer. Sometimes victory belongs to the radio man who stayed at his post while his ship was sinking, who saw the problem clearly, and who had the courage to break every rule to fix it. Remember James Murray. Remember that innovation doesn't require authority. It requires clarity, courage, and the refusal to give up. Because sometimes in the darkest moments, when the ship is listing and the water is rising and everything seems lost, one person with one idea can change the world.